I can tell you exactly how TCU fans will talk about the 2026 season simply based off the results of these 5 games. Oh, yeah, it's Locked on Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked on Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? I'm Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South. Thank you for making this journey with me, making it your first listen of the day every day. We close out today's episode with a look at standalone games for the TCU football season. And I mean games where you don't have a ton of other college football matchups to look out for. It's just TCU. We're going to talk about that at the end of the season or at the end of the episode. But I have 5 games that will completely tell the story of TCU season. Some of those games are going to be in there. But I also want to talk about the aspect of playing isolated by itself in a separate segment. There's 5 games that I think will completely tell the story of TCU season. Texas Tech, Utah, BYU. Oh, shocker, right? I think those 3 are extremely important. And then I'm going to go with Baylor and North Carolina. I'm going to start off with those top 3 that I gave the little disclaimer of how shocking they were. When it comes to the end of the season, we all want to know how TCU fared against the best teams in the conference. Do we know who that is right now? No. But we have our expectations. We have our ideas. And I think that these 3 teams were the best last year. And I think that they all have good reason to believe that they'll be good again. Let's start off with Texas Tech because I think they do prove different things. I do think they prove completely different things, even though they all have the same general. I was talking to a friend earlier about how slasher movies are technically horror movies, but I think they're so separate, though they fall in that same umbrella. A slasher movie versus a supernatural movie, a movie that's about jump scares, like all of these things may fall into the category of horror, but they all are meant to achieve different things, in my opinion. The way I view them is differently. I could say the same thing for BYU, Utah, and Texas Tech. When it comes to Texas Tech, that feels like the biggest statement game that's largely dependent on how everything else goes. No disrespect to beating Houston and no disrespect to beating USC. I understand that for what they represented big moments. But that USC game was a bowl game in which everybody wasn't participating, and that goes for both sides. Some people feel like, oh, USC had this. That wasn't the entire USC team, and this wasn't the entire TCU team. So I think it was a great moment. I love the Ken Seals. I love the River Walk-Off. I think that it was great to establish momentum going into the offseason. It was great to establish that momentum after losing Hoover, right? Like, I think Ken Seals doing what he did makes replacing Josh Hoover feel even more doable. I think you're going to hear some of the same talking points about who Hoover was, but I think Seals coming out and having that game and his one opportunity made you feel a lot more confident. Houston was a top 25 victory, but who really fully believed in Houston? There were still question marks on exactly who the Cougars could be. If you go beat Texas Tech, I can only assume right now that beating Texas Tech is going to be a statement victory that you haven't had since the 2022 season. For me, of everybody on here, this feels like the statement victory. Is the last game of the season. Hopefully, TCU has something to play for beyond just what kind of bowl game they'll be in. But if you go into that Texas Tech game with any sort of stake, I don't care if it's trying to get win number 9, so hopefully you get win number 10 in the bowl game. I don't care if it's trying to get number 10 in the regular season. That would be huge. I don't care if it's trying to get to the playoffs or to the conference championship or being in the mix for the conference championship. I think all of these things are extremely important. I can only hope that the stakes match the statement that is possible. Because even if you lose so many games, if you're relatively decent and you go beat Texas Tech, that's going to give you so much more momentum. And I would argue it'll probably be your first statement victory in 4 years. TCU hasn't had a statement victory since they played in the college football playoffs and won that first round matchup. Ever since then, they've been chasing that moment. And you could argue, well, they finally got it against Houston. I just don't feel that way. You could argue they had it against USC. I'm way more willing to kind of give you that because it was such a moment. It was a monumental moment, but I'm just partial against, right? Like I'm against bowl games and how much weight I give them as far as statement victories. This is no doubt. This is no doubt. I know that Brendan Sorsby isn't there, but this is still a team that you think is going to be really good. This is still a team that has a guy in Will Hammond that they actually feel very confident about. Red Raider fans feel confident about Will Hammond. It's just a matter of when does he get back to football and how quickly does he acclimate? They say he may be cleared by August. Okay, he's cleared by August, but is there going to be a ramp up period? I think a lot of that's going to determine just how good that Texas Tech is going to be. But you already have people still projecting them to win the Big 12 without Brendan Sorsby, excuse me. So things to think about. When it comes to BYU, I'm maintaining exactly how I feel. I know a lot of people probably felt like Texas Tech was the biggest game on TCU schedule. I get it because it's the biggest team. It's the most successful team. And I understand that thought process. To me, what BYU did to them a year ago, and my everydayers know, what BYU did to them a year ago, I think TCU really needs to beat BYU. And it's the first of these three matchups. I can go through Baylor, or excuse me, I can go through Texas Tech, Texas Tech, Utah, and BYU. But which one comes first? Right? Like these are the other two are the last two games of the season. I almost didn't put Utah on this list. Utah was very close to missing this list, but I'll get to why I kept them in that moment. But to me, BYU is the team that is the most consistent. They've been the most consistent team in the Big 12. They just have. In beating them, there's no doubt. You can have question marks about Texas Tech. You can get to the end of the season, and all these things we're talking about Texas Tech, irrelevant. Like we can have these conversations. Texas Tech going to be this. The Red Raiders going to be that. Look at what they're coming off of. And then we get to November 28th, I believe it is now. I believe it's November 28th. November 26th, excuse me. They changed it from the 28th. It's November 26th. And Texas Tech is a middle of the pack team. And all of a sudden, none of it matters. None of it matters. That's the problem with the end of the season. Is all these games that we highlight and whatnot, they could mean nothing because we don't know what this world is going to look like. Texas Tech may not be that squad. But Utah, let's get to them now because I think BYU is the most consistent. I think they're going to be the most surefire team that's going to send a message. And also, you play them the earliest when you play them on the week 5 matchup week 5 matchup because I had to go through the math, but TCU plays week 0. You're going on a week 5 matchup. Hey, that's a statement that could be made. And I don't think there's going to be much that BYU does to make them look weak. Then you get to Utah. And I almost didn't put down Utah because I thought it was a little too easy. But also I wanted to tell the truth. Sometimes the truth is easy. And this is one of those. But another reason I almost didn't put them down is because, honestly, Utah has so many things changing. Right? Like, go listen to my guy JT because he does a great job breaking down Utah, great things, breaking down what they're retooling, the in-house hire at head coach. Like, there's so many things going on with the Utes, but you know what they still have? They still have Devin Dampier. And no, his name's not Devin Peer. I didn't add a word in between. His name is Devin Dampier. All right? Though it is appropriate that it sounds this way because the boy bad. I'm going to let you know the boy is tough when it comes to it because he's one of my favorite quarterbacks in the conference from last year. But then they got a guy in Bird Ficklin who's also athletic, who's also dynamic. And you just think to yourself, you're not supposed to have two quarterbacks who can be dynamic. I wanted to get cute. I wanted to go with a team that wasn't Utah, but at the end of the day, I trust a lot in Dampier. I know that they're losing their 2 tackles. That's going to be tough. I know that they're losing their coach. That's going to be tough. I think hiring from within kind of helps a little bit, but those two aren't the same person. The style of motivation, the in-game decisions, a lot of the culture will be the same, but there's certain aspects that just are going to change no matter how close you get to your former head coach. He's not the same person as your former head coach. So I just look at this as a situation where Utah's going to go through some changes, but I still expect them to be a really good team. I still think that they're an extremely talented team. And maybe, scratch the maybe, more importantly than anything else, they got Devin Dampier. They got a stud at quarterback that TCU is going to have to deal with. So if we roll around to the end of November, November 22nd, and they're one of the best teams, don't be shocked. And TCU needs to show they can beat one of the better teams. However, when I look at this squad, though I have high belief in the quarterback, I have question marks about the things around and the moving pieces. And because of that, I feel like if I had to go through the triumvirate of BYU, Utah, and Texas Tech, the one I would say is the most susceptible, the one that I would say you could get more than the other two, is Utah. And if you beat Utah, you still have a statement victory. Your first one in 4 years. We'll see exactly what that looks like by the time the end of November rolls around. Maybe it looks like the Houston game. Maybe. But let's get into some of those other matchups, ones that aren't in the top 3 echelon of the Big 12, but ones I still think are going to be important matchups. Let's get into it as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And listen, I understand that sometimes workplace chaos starts to stack up on you. I understand that sometimes deadline become a little bit too much. I understand that there's a job you've been waiting to get filled for what feels like months. And when that pressure is on, you got to get the right hire. You need the right hire, and it's a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for from a skills, experience, and location standpoint. So you're not just hoping that the right candidate stumbles across your point. Here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I'll be talking to you, 27 hires will be made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. That's less stress, less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get $75 in sponsored job credit just for listening to the show. Get your job the premium status it deserves by going to Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast right now. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day and making us the #1 sports podcast network in the country. Yes, we couldn't do this without you. And honestly, I personally wouldn't want to. So go ahead and continue to help this show grow by going to lockedonhornfrogs.supercast.com. That's lockedonhornfrogs.supercast.com, an everydayer club in which we get to have one-on-one conversation. You get access to merch. You get access to other group chats so you can go talk trash to all of your Baylor friends or some of your Baylor enemies in their Discord as well. Speaking of Baylor, Baylor is another one of those games that I highlight. And it's mostly because, yes, it's a huge rivalry. But at the same time, losing SMU makes this rivalry even larger to me because you're not going to have the iron skillet and the rivalry to say, oh, we went 1-1. No one wants to go 1-1. But you can't even say that. Right? So now it has to be 1-0. It's the game that you're looking forward to. And to me, this game is not going to be easy. It's a rivalry. It's the rivalry. I don't know what the split is between people who feel SMU versus Baylor, right? Like, I'm sure there's people who prefer the Baylor rivalry over the SMU one. I'm sure there's people who prefer the SMU rivalry over the Baylor one. I don't know what the split is, but you got one now. You got one of the two. And I don't think it's going to be an easy matchup. I genuinely don't. I think that these are two teams who are in I was about to lie to you and tell you very similar situations. They were until Dykes got his extension. Once Dykes got the extension, everything changed because Dave Aranda is on the hot seat. All right. Dave Aranda can't sit down. I think that Aranda was always on a hotter seat than Dykes. Let's just be very clear. I don't think that Dave Aranda and Sonny Dykes were under the same amount of pressure and scrutiny. I think that Aranda is out here fighting for his job. I think he has to fight to prove he deserves his job. Even before the extension, I think Dykes was fighting to prove the faith they already had in him. He wasn't looking to be like, I'm on thin ice. I don't think that's the way he looked at it. Obviously, that's not the way that people who are making decisions looked at it. But Sonny Dykes was under pressure. Now, the part that they're very similar in is they're both losing extremely productive quarterbacks. We can say what we want to say about Hoover, and we can say what we want to say about Sawyer Robinson. But both of these players were extremely productive as far as accumulating yards, and they both had massive issues at protecting the football. Sawyer Robinson threw the ball 504 times. 504 times in 12 games. Josh Hoover threw the ball 413 times in 12 games. Noah Fafita does jump in between those two. He has 429 attempts, but he played 13 games. So I think that is a bit of a difference. When you look at Hoover, 13 interceptions. Sawyer Robinson, number 2 with 12. You look at yards. That's just raw yards. Sawyer Robinson, 3,681. Josh Hoover, 3,472. Touchdowns. Both of those are 1 and 2, by the way. Touchdowns. Sawyer Robinson, 31. Josh Hoover, 29, which is also 1-2. Fafita's 29 as well, but he had an extra game to do it. So when you start getting through these numbers, they're both losing quarterbacks who are highly productive at stacking up yards, racking up touchdowns, but also highly productive in the column you don't want to be productive in, and that is interceptions. So it's very similar when you look at how they produced. You're replacing them with, I think, 2 drastically different approaches, but the same thing needs to be replaced. When it comes to TCU, they went to get a guy in Jaden Craig who he's been on the FCS level, extremely productive. He's a proven commodity. And when you look at it, TCU went and got the proven commodity from a lower level of football, while Baylor went and got the higher known commodity, but not nearly as productive, not nearly as consistent. I would say they both have the same amount of questions. Which one you prefer could be where you prefer to have the risks. TCU and Baylor are in very similar situations. One head coach has more security now, so they're not in the same situation. But at quarterback, it is super similar. It is extremely similar. You're losing some of your more productive receiving threats, right? Like you're losing a Michael Trigg if you're Baylor. You're losing an Eric McAllister if you're TCU. But I think where TCU and Baylor obviously have their rivalry, and who comes out on top may determine, or may be dependent upon, let me say that, who comes out on top may be dependent on how the quarterback plays. And what's interesting is, as many similarities as I can draw between Baylor and TCU, the biggest difference is the fact that TCU went with a guy who was highly productive, highly consistent, and kind of a steady commodity in Jaden Craig, but he played on the FCS level. So the question is, how does his play perform when he rises as far as competition level? Then Baylor goes to get a guy in DJ Lagway, who, I'll be honest with you, I have been a fan of. I have thought he was an extremely talented quarterback, but he doesn't do it often enough. So now he doesn't have he's coming from a lower level, but he has the guy who says, can the flashes from Florida translate to consistency at Baylor? These are 2 major questions that determine whether or not a quarterback can be good, and they both exist in spades when it comes to TCU and Baylor. Last one I'm going to highlight, the last game, and it's different, right? There's no common theme between these two like it was for the first 3, but the last game I'm going to highlight is North Carolina. I think that the North Carolina game being week 1 or week 0, right? So the first game, I keep messing that up. So let me just say the first game. That being the season opener and a game in which it comes against a Power 4 team, because some people open up with the Rudy Poo, but it's against a Power 4 team. All of the questions I have for TCU, I will be looking to see them answered in week 1. Did it again in the first game. And I understand that it won't be. right? Like I've said this a million times. And even when I say things like I'm looking for them to be answered, I don't fall victim into believing that these answers are concrete. The TCU UC in Dublin, Ireland will not be the TCUC in the Carter on week 7 or 8, right? Like it won't be the TCU that has to travel to Arizona on a Friday night. It's not going to be that same team. I don't know that that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. We'll see, because it could be a different team because of injuries, could be a different team because of pure improvements. But I look at a guy like Jacob Fields, who's coming from La Tech, and he dominated on La Tech, right? Like he was a co-defensive player of the year in the Conference USA. Who's to say it's going to click immediately? And I'm a big fan. I've talked about this a million times. He's my favorite transfer portal player. Jaden Craig comes up from the Ivies. He may need time to get acclimated. But if Craig comes in week 1 and he gets to slicing people up, it says something. North Carolina is still a P4 team. North Carolina is still a team led by Bill Belichick. And no matter how bad that North Carolina is, I still trust in Belichick's mind as a defensive coach. I still believe in his mind as a defensive coach. So I think that Jaden Craig could get tripped up by Belichick. If he doesn't, that tells me something. Like you're looking for confirmation for confidence. That's how I put it yesterday. In week 1, you want confirmation for confidence. TCU then changed out quarterbacks, then changed out one of their safeties, one of the more productive safeties, and the first TCU player picked in a draft, right? Like a top 2 round pick, and Bud Clark getting replaced. Caleb Elam-Zor and Nnamdi Obi-Izor, both of which were drafted in the 26th NFL draft. You're replacing them. You're going to have to get new corners. You just need to bolster that position, period. It's not about replacing a star. You just need to get better. Speaking of premier positions, you need to get an edge rusher that's going to strike fear. There's so many different things you're looking for. Did I mention that Eric McAllister is a player who, honestly, one of the most productive receivers in the conference, or excuse me, in the country, the most productive receiver in the conference. These are all aspects that you have to pay attention to because you're questioning how do you replace them. In week 0, we're going to have answers to that, and it's a preliminary answer. I want to know how Jaden Craig connects with Jordan Dwyer. I want to know if Jordan Dwyer is simply a number 1 wide receiver. He certainly looked the part against North Carolina last year, but then when you have Eric McAllister racking up nearly 2,000 or 1,200 yards, not 2,000, that'd be crazy. But he racking up nearly 1,200 yards. It's tough to sustain that as a number 2 receiver, what he did in week 0. So there's things I'm looking forward to. In week 1 is the one where you see it. The reason I say these 5 games, I'll give you that as we continue, and then I'll get into the standalone games, telling you why these 5 matchups will define how TCU fans talk about the season. It will define how TCU fans talk about the season, despite the fact that you could technically lose these 5 games and go 7-5 on your season. I'm not saying that. I think each one serves its own purpose. Let's close that out by looking at it as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Whew. TCU has 5 games that I've highlighted that I believe are going to really determine how TCU fans talk about the season. And I kind of consolidated those first 3 together, so I think it's pretty easy to take in why they're all the same. But in 3 different ways, TCU will be able to prove whether or not they can hang with the big dogs when it comes to playing Tech, when it comes to playing Utah, when it comes to playing BYU. So those 3 games against who are the 3 best teams in the conference last year, 3 teams that we expect to be, if not the 3 best teams in the conference yet again, 3 of the best teams. TCU needs to prove that they can play with the best teams because at the end of the day, that's what every single fan wants. TCU has yet to have a statement victory in my mind since that 2022 season. BYU, Texas Tech, Utah, 3 opportunities for you to be able to do that. And for me, statement is a little bit more than just a top 25 game. Sorry, Houston. When you look at North Carolina, that's just how you start. Simply put, the way you start your season, especially when you play 2 FCS matchups afterwards, if you beat North Carolina, you're going into that situation, or you're going to the next month of action, essentially just trying to prove that was correct. And that's solid. That's easy money. But if you lose that game, you're trying to prove it was a fluke. You're trying to prove that that's not who you were. And fighting against a negative stereotype is much worse. It's much more difficult to shake than just saying, I'm going to bolster this positive thing. We're looking for positivity. We're fans. We want to see positivity. And then lastly, that Baylor game is a rivalry matchup, and it's no iron skillet to distract from it. And at the end of the day, that's something that we're going to talk about no matter what. No matter what happens, you could lose every single game, but if you beat Baylor, guess who's going to brag? Hey, you are the only game we beat. We won. So I think that rivalry aspect, consolidating it, the 5 games on TCU schedule that I think determine how fans will talk about the season is BYU, Texas Tech, Utah, because those are 3 attempts at least at having a statement victory. These are the 3 best teams from last year and 3 of the best teams going into this year if everything goes according to plan. Baylor is a rivalry. Rivalries naturally determine how you talk about a season because it's one of the highlight and standout moments every single year. And in North Carolina, I think that'll set the tone for the season and be how we talk about TCU for the first month. From the moment they finish in Dublin until the moment they lace it up against Central Florida, we'll talk about them based on how they looked in Dublin. Playing against Grambling and Arkansas State probably isn't going to change that. Let's get into these standalone games, though. So TCU was, and I was reading this article recently, TCU had 2 of the 5 biggest games in the Big 12. And I think that's interesting. And it was based on the fact that, hey, they're going to get to represent the Big 12 in Dublin. When you play North Carolina, when you're playing a week 0 game, yes, you represent yourself, but you also kind of represent your conference. And I think that's the cool thing about college athletics is so often what you do on a big stage when no one else is around, right? You're playing 11 a.m. You're playing 11 a.m., week 0 in Dublin, Ireland. People are going to look. North Carolina still has Bill Belichick. Though it was disappointing, people are going to tune in. And what you do could easily be look at the Big 12 spanking the ACC yet again. That's the cool thing. We have such conference pride until it's conference, battles. But until then, and then after that, when you get into the bowl season, man, SEC teams want SEC teams to win. Big 12 teams want Big 12 teams to win. Big 10 teams want Big 10 teams to win, right? Like Big 12 wants you to go beat an SEC team. They do. They want you to go beat an SEC team because it reflects well upon your conference. Oh, man, and then you want that. See, here's the thing. I want to go beat North Carolina, and then I want North Carolina to go undefeated. Now it makes TCU look good. There's 2 other standalone games, one being Texas Tech. Like I said, some of them are going to be in here. Texas Tech is on November Day. We all have different opinions on it. I'm sorry. I still don't think that's great for the game. I just don't. Having to go against Kansas City versus Buffalo does not sound appealing to me, but I know everybody has different opinions on it. They feel like because it's the only college football game on, it'll be people attracted to it. I just think that most people are going to watch Josh Allen versus Mahomes. And I knew they would put a game like that on that time. That's why I was able to say that before we got to finding out who the game was going to be between on Thanksgiving night. Whatever, neither here nor there. I got to leave it alone, but I told myself I'd speak my little piece on it. I think that this game is obviously a statement, but it's also like, hey, no other college football is on. So anybody who just wants to watch college football, someone who doesn't really rock with the NFL, I get it. NFL is doing Black Friday games. I think they're doing a Thursday night or a Thanksgiving Eve game. Some people are like, y'all just being greedy. We're not going to keep feeding in all of this. You stumbled across TCU versus Texas Tech. Could be another statement victory. Could be another game where it's like, hey, not much college football is on, so we're going to talk about this. Then lastly, you have the Arizona game. And Arizona was actually the matchup I almost picked. I almost picked Arizona over Utah just because I think Arizona's a team to watch. I do. But with it being on a Friday night, we're not going to dive too much into it because as much as I love Devin Dampier, I really like Noah Fifita too. So I think that playing that game on a Friday when there's probably not going to be anybody else playing, the NFL does this weird thing where they like to play some Friday games. I don't think they'll be playing them at that point. It's another standout matchup when everybody's watching for you to showcase who you are, showcase what you have to bring to the table, not just amongst the country, but also within the conference, because people are going to check that game out. It's going to be late. It's going to be late, but people are going to check that game out. So there's always different ways that I feel like you can pay attention to, or you can prove a point. And one of the biggest ways to prove it is when playing standalone games. There is no, for example, that Arizona game probably would have been at night no matter what, because it's in Arizona. That's the same day as Alabama LSU. That would have been a tough game to be swallowed up by. It just would have been. But now you stand alone and you get to showcase everything. It's not about beating one of the best teams in the conference. It's just about putting your best foot forward when everybody gets to see the conference. And we need that. As the Big 12, we need to have games like TCU versus Arizona be great. We need games like TCU versus Texas Tech to be great. We need to see TCU have a good showing in Dublin, because it all works towards bolstering the conference. And if TCU, who has 3 standalone games in 2026 so far, if they can showcase strong performances in all 3 matchups, you're looking at possibly that being one of the things that drives the Big 12 to becoming a 2-team conference when you're talking about the college football playoffs. I just think those things come into play if they consistently look good on standalone stages. Now, as we move forward, we'll be back tomorrow to talk a little bit of recruiting. It's a big-time recruiting weekend for TCU. Big-time recruiting weekend. So we're going to get into that on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.